Some people say, oh no, Azure is just renting someone else's computer. Well, it's true, but it's not just that. It's renting someone else's computer, database, networking, storage, monitoring, authentication, AI services, backups, messaging systems, deploying tools, security infrastructures, and etc. And all of them connected together. And I don't know if it made it better or not, but I'm sure if you are clueless about Azure like I was a few days ago, some question will hit your mind. Does using Azure limit your freedom in developing? Should you pay for all those services even if you don't use all of them in your application? And how much using Azure costs compared to a regular VPS? And at last, how hard really it is to use Azure? And I made a little research about it, and in today's video I wanna answer those questions. Number 1, does using Azure limit your freedom in developing your app? Imagine you just got Azure and now you have two options. First, treating it like a regular VPS. You install SSH and RPD yourself, you install Windows or Linux, you create and use your own authentication and verification system, your own messaging system, you install RabbitMQ, you run Docker, and you do whatever that you want. You even use the external services that you have made in another VPS, or you just use commercial external services like LiveChannel, etc. And you can use any programming language that you want. Just because Azure made by Microsoft doesn't mean that you're limited to the Microsoft's productions. And you have total freedom in Azure to do all of that and even more. But using Azure this way is really worth it? And I can kind of say no, it really doesn't worth it because Azure is costly, and we will get to that. And your second option to treat the Azure that you got. Azure is a managed services, means there are lots of services that you can use. Azure SQL database gives you a strong database to use. Azure Global Storage Service gives you a good service to storage documents, videos, files, and etc. in a larger scale. And Azure Cached Redis will storage the frequently accessed data and make your program smoother and faster. And Azure functions as a serverless service that runs your code automatically when some specific events occur, and it accepts many programming languages. Or Azure's Active Directory, the Microsoft authentication and verification system. It manages authentication, permissions, logins, and etc. And now when you use all those Azure fancy services, your app now depends on them. And you should pay for all those services monthly to keep your app alive. It's called vendor lock-in in finance and economy. You do something that now people depend on the service that you are providing to them. Instead of RabbitMQ, you use Azure Bus Service. And instead of creating and using your own authentication system, you now use Azure Active Directory, and etc. So it doesn't mean you don't have freedom and you won't use other stuff, but simply migrating is so hard right now and requires lots of work. Number 2, should you pay for all those Azure services even if you might never use them on your app? Well, no, there is no forced one giant subscription for all the Azure services. You should imagine it like a supermarket. You go inside and you pay for everything that you pick. For example, for a simple ASP.NET application, you just need one virtual machine, one database, and some storage. And you won't pay for Azure AI analysis and other services. However, many services charge independently. For example, in our case, we had a simple ASP.NET application for the virtual machine, database, storage, load balancer, bandwidth, and backup. Each of them has its own bill. And if I'm gonna be honest, those bills are more than usual. And when people that had no clue over Azure look at those bills, they usually get surprised. Number 3, how much Azure costs compared to a regular VPS? Well, let's assume this. We have this small server running a web application, 2 CPU, 4GB RAM, 50 to 80GB SSD storage, and Linux OC. And it's running 24/7 for a month. How much does it cost in Azure and a VPS? That VPS in Ocean Digit and Lidon costs $24 per month. And you can even get the cheaper one in Hessner for $5 to $8 per month. Same thing in Azure with 2 CPU and 4GB RAM alone costs roughly $30 to $50, depending on the exact type of virtual machine and the region. Then add other things like storage that is $5 per month, data transfer, backups, public IP, and etc. A realistic simple production setup might end up $40 to $70 per month. And as you can see, Azure is much more expensive compared to a simple VPS, sometimes 2 to 5 times more expensive. And it is for the same raw hardware. And the reason is you are not just paying for the raw hardware in Azure. You are paying for the worldwide infrastructure, enterprise networking, security, managed services, compliance, global availability, and all of them integrated with thousands of Azure services across the globe. And enterprise support options, so if you are just building a simple portfolio, a blog, a Discord or Telegram bot, or a small API, Azure is overkill and it's too much for you. It's just extra cost. Number 4, can you upload any app on Azure regardless of what technology it uses? Almost yes, Azure provides you a virtual machine. You can almost install any OC and framework that you want on it. Windows, Linux, ASP.NET Core, Node.js, and etc. etc. Azure also has designed services for the specific technologies. For example, Azure App Service supports many common web stacks. Azure Functions supports several programming languages. Container apps and AKS run containers regardless of what language is inside them. The only time you can hit limitations is when you are using highly managed services that expect your app to follow certain deployment models or certain runtime requirements. So basically, if your application runs on Windows and Linux, Azure can almost certainly host your application. Number 5. How hard is it for a clueless person about Azure to use it? It really depends what do we mean by using Azure. If you just want to apply a simple application or a website, it's not really hard, you can learn it in a few days. If you want to be a cloud engineer, or more specifically, an Azure cloud engineer, there are over 200 services that all of them are important. Well, almost all of them are important. For example, networking, VNets, load balancers, AKS, functions, identity, Terraform, SQL, storage, and etc. And learning all of them takes months or even years. You should understand that here the biggest challenge isn't programming, it's understanding the cloud architecture. Being able to answer the questions like, which service should I choose for this project? Should I use a virtual machine or an app service? How should networking and security be configured? And those decisions will be easier with experience, so don't worry about it. And if you want to know why you will love Linux as a programmer, I recommend you to watch this video. And by the way, I have a Discord server which is a good community for programmers. Check it through the link below in the description. Leave me in the comments what you think about Azure and this technology. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe if this video was useful for you, and see you in the next video.